The sea had always been Daniel's world. He had spent more time beneath the waves than on land, exploring wrecks, mapping unknown depths, and unearthing secrets lost to time. But even with all his experience, something about today's mission unsettled him. The coordinates had come from nowhere. A signal picked up by the research vessel Orpheus, marking the location of a shipwreck that shouldn't exist. No records, no distress calls, no historical mentions. Just a silent anomaly in the middle of the ocean, waiting to be discovered. As the vessel approached the marked site, an eerie stillness settled over the water. The sea was unnaturally calm. No waves, no wind. The sky, a perfect slate of gray, stretched endlessly, swallowing the horizon. Even the seabirds had vanished. Daniel stood at the edge of the deck, adjusting his diving gear, his breath slow and measured. The others were already prepping. Lucas, his closest friend and fellow diver, triple-checked his oxygen levels. Their team leader, Captain Reeves, barked out last-minute instructions, but his voice felt distant, muffled by the overwhelming silence surrounding them. Then the sonar pinged. The display flickered, and a dark mass materialized on the screen. The wreck lay just beneath them, almost perfectly intact. But something was off. Unlike most wrecks, which break apart as they sink, this one had settled too cleanly, as if it had simply stopped existing above the water and reappeared below. "Looks fresh," Lucas murmured, glancing at the screen. "No sign of decay." "That's impossible," Daniel muttered. Wrecks didn't stay intact. Time and pressure devoured them. But as the drone camera was deployed, its feed confirmed what the sonar suggested. The ship was whole. No corrosion. No marine life. Just a husk of steel sitting in total isolation, untouched by the sea. Daniel felt a cold unease creep up his spine. The water should have been alive with fish, crustaceans, coral growth, but there was nothing. Just a dead space in the middle of the ocean. A crackling noise burst through their radios. Static. At first, Daniel assumed it was interference from the drone. Then, a faint sound whispered through the speaker. A voice. No, it was more like a distorted echo, stretching across the waves. Lucas turned to him. "Did you hear that?" Daniel nodded, but before he could answer, Captain Reeves' voice cut in. "Divers, gear up. You're going in." Daniel hesitated, staring at the water below. It looked wrong, darker than it should be, almost like a shadow of something deeper than the sea itself. But there was no turning back now. Taking one last breath, Daniel adjusted his mask, checked his air supply, and with a final glance at Lucas, plunged into the abyss. The moment Daniel entered the water, the world above ceased to exist. The surface shimmered like a fragile barrier between two realities, and below him, an endless void stretched into the abyss. Even with his high-powered dive light, the water felt unnaturally dark, swallowing everything beyond a few meters. Lucas followed closely behind, his breathing steady over the calms. The rest of the team, Miller and Torres, descended alongside them, their lights flickering like distant stars in a black sky. Then the wreck came into view. Daniel's pulse quickened. The ship wasn't just intact, it was pristine. The metal hull was eerily smooth, untouched by rust or time. The windows, though dark, weren't shattered. The name Persephone was still visible on the bow, as if the ship had sunk yesterday. But that wasn't possible. "Jesus," Miller muttered. "This thing's a damn ghost." Lucas floated closer, running a gloved hand along the hull. No barnacles. No corrosion. No signs of decay. "This doesn't make sense," Daniel murmured. "There should be something." Then his dive computer flickered. The depth reading jumped erratically, numbers flashing between reality and nonsense. Torres' voice crackled through the comms. "Are you guys seeing this?" The ship's interior lights were on. It was impossible. No wreck should have electricity. No ship could survive down here with its power intact. But there it was, a faint glow pulsing behind the portholes, like the heartbeat of something that refused to die. A high-pitched whine burst through their radios. The comms hissed with static, and for a split second, Daniel thought he heard a voice beneath the interference. A whisper, a word he couldn't quite make out. Then silence. Reeves' voice finally cut through. "Diverse report." What the hell was that? Daniel steadied himself. "We were fine. Just interference. Proceed with caution. Stay in visual contact." The team regrouped at the ship's entrance. The main hatch was wide open, yawning like a black hole. Daniel felt something tugging at his instincts, a deep, primal warning. Something wasn't right. But Lucas had already moved forward. "Come on," he said. "We didn't come all this way just to float out here." One by one, they entered. The moment Daniel crossed the threshold, everything changed. Inside, the wreck wasn't flooded. There was no water at all. The corridors were dry, the air thick with an oppressive stillness. Paperwork was still on desks. Chairs stood upright. A coffee mug sat on a table, untouched, as if someone had just left the room. Daniel's breath caught. This wasn't a wreck. The Persephone hadn't drowned. It had been waiting. The air inside the Persephone was suffocating. Even though their suits still registered as submerged, everything about this place felt dry, too dry. The air was stale, thick with something unseen but palpable, like an invisible presence pressing against them. Daniel moved carefully, scanning the corridor with his flashlight. The light bounced off walls untouched by decay, as if the ship had never met the ocean. This isn't possible. Torres moved ahead, cautiously stepping through a doorway. His voice crackled over the comms. This place, it's too clean, too perfect. Lucas knelt by a small wooden table near the entrance. A rusted plaque read, Captain's Quarters. On the table sat something impossible. A journal. The pages were dry. The ink was fresh. Daniel hesitated before picking it up. The cover was warm. As he flipped the pages, his stomach twisted. The last entry was dated 3 days ago. October 17th. We are still here. God help us, we are still here. The ship sank. I saw it happen. I felt the water in my lungs. We all did, but we never left. The wreck is our grave, yet we remain. If someone finds this, leave. Leave before it. The sentence ended abruptly. The ink smudged as if the writer had been yanked away mid-word. Daniel's grip on the book tightened. His pulse pounded in his ears. 3 days ago. This ship should have been lost for decades. Torres' voice cut through his thoughts. Guys, I think I found something worse. They turned toward him. He was at the far end of the room, his flashlight aimed at a row of uniforms still hanging from hooks on the wall. At first, they looked normal, until they started to shift. The suits weren't empty. A deep, suffocating silence filled the room as the realization dawned on them. The uniforms bulged unnaturally, shapes pressing from the inside. But they weren't moving, they were breathing. Then, the whispering started. A voice, no voices, crawled through the comms, slipping between frequencies like a radio tuning itself. Lucas grabbed Daniel's arm. We need to go. Now. The whispering grew louder. Then the ship moved. A deep groan reverberated through the metal, and the lights overhead flickered. Daniel's mind screamed for him to run, but his body felt heavy, as if something unseen were wrapping around him, dragging him deeper into the ship's hold. Then, from behind them, a new sound. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Wet. Something wasn't supposed to be here. Lucas pulled at his shoulder. Daniel. But Daniel had already turned. A figure stood in the hallway, drenched, hollow-eyed, wearing the remains of a Persephone crew uniform. Then it spoke. You shouldn't be here. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The figure standing in the hallway was wrong. Human in shape, but too still, like a corpse that had forgotten how to move naturally. Its uniform was soaked, the fabric clinging to decayed flesh. Water dripped onto the dry floor, forming pools that spread unnaturally, like ink bleeding through paper. Then it blinked. Daniel took a slow step back. Lucas' grip on his arm tightened. You shouldn't be here, the figure repeated, its voice a wet, gurgling whisper. No one moved. The air grew thick, pressing against them like the weight of the deep sea itself. Then, the ship shuddered. The lights flickered violently. A deep groan reverberated through the metal, like the entire structure was protesting their presence. Then Torres' voice shattered the silence. Run! The spell broke. Daniel spun and bolted down the corridor, the others right behind him. The ship shifted beneath their feet, the walls seeming to stretch and contort, as if the wreck was no longer bound by the laws of the real world. Torres reached a bulkhead and shoved it open. They stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind them. Darkness swallowed them. Only their dive lights cut through the pitch-black void. The air was different here. Daniel's stomach twisted. The room, no, the entire ship, felt displaced, like they weren't underwater anymore. Lucas' voice was ragged over the comms. What the hell is happening? No one had an answer. Then, Daniel noticed something. His dive computer, which had been malfunctioning since they arrived, was frozen. The depth readout no longer changed. That wasn't possible. The comms crackled again. But this time, it wasn't Reeves. It was himself. A voice, identical to his own, whispered through the static. You have to get out. You have to choose the right door. A cold terror gripped him. Lucas' light flickered wildly as he scanned the room. Then he froze. "Guys," his voice barely held together. "Where's the exit?" Daniel turned, and his blood ran cold. The door they had just come through was gone. Nothing but smooth, unbroken metal remained. Torres pounded on the wall, his breathing ragged. No, this isn't real. But it was. The Persephone wasn't just a shipwreck. It was a trap. Daniel's heart pounded as he pressed his palm against the wall where the door had been. Solid metal. No seams. No hinges. Just an unbroken surface where an exit should have been. We just came through here," Lucas stammered. His voice was shaking. "I turned around for a second, and now it's..." Torres slammed a fist against the metal. "We are not trapped in a damn ghost story. There has to be a way out." Daniel tried to steady his breathing, but his thoughts raced. The Persephone wasn't just a wreck. It was something else. Something that existed outside of time, outside of reality itself. His own voice still echoed in his mind. The comms. "You have to get out. You have to choose the right door." Daniel swung his dive light across the room, scanning the walls. The beams cut through the darkness, revealing something that hadn't been there before. A row of doors. Identical. Featureless. Lining the walls like a twisted maze. Torres turned to him. "Which one?" Daniel didn't answer. He had no idea. But every instinct screamed that choosing wrong meant something worse than death. A faint knocking came from behind one of them. Then another. Then a voice. "Help us." Muffled. Garbled. Like someone speaking underwater. Lucas swallowed hard. I think someone's still here." Daniel's stomach twisted. No one was alive in this place. Then, one of the doors creaked open by itself. A gust of freezing air spilled out, carrying a faint sound laughter. Daniel's light flickered. His gut screamed not to look inside, but he couldn't stop himself. He stepped forward and aimed his light through the gap. There was nothing. No floor. No ceiling. Just a vast, infinite abyss, stretching into an empty void. Something was staring back at him. A shape. A presence. It whispered his name. Daniel slammed the door shut. "This ship isn't letting us go," he whispered, turning to the others. "It's trying to keep us here. Or worse, turn us into whatever happened to them." Lucas shook his head, stepping away from the doors. No, I refuse to believe that. We need to." A loud bang cut him off. One of the doors on the far side of the room burst open. A figure stumbled out. Soaked. Eyes wide. Mouth moving silently, forming words that never made a sound. Lucas screamed. The figure was him. A perfect copy of Lucas, dripping wet, hollow-eyed, staring directly at him. Daniel grabbed Lucas and pulled him back. The other Lucas raised a shaking hand and pointed to a different door. The right door. The one they had to take. Daniel didn't hesitate. He shoved Torres and Lucas forward. "Run." They rushed through the door, and the world split apart. The moment Daniel crossed the threshold, his vision blurred. The cold gripped his body, seeping into his bones. For a split second, the world folded in on itself, a kaleidoscope of shifting metal, dark water, and endless corridors. Then, he was falling. With a violent rush, Daniel broke through the surface of the ocean, gasping for air. The Persephone was gone. The water around him was calm, untouched, as if the ship had never existed. His dive computer flickered back to life, showing normal readings. Then he heard a second splash. Lucas. He surfaced a few feet away, coughing and disoriented. Torres was next, breaking the water with a gasp, wild-eyed. They had made it, but something was wrong. There was no sign of the Orpheus. No searchlights. No radio chatter. Just an unnatural stillness, stretching across the ocean like an unspoken warning. Daniel treaded water, scanning the horizon. "Where's the ship?" Lucas turned in slow circles. It was right here. Torres fumbled with his radio. "Reeves? Orpheus, do you copy?" Static. Then, a whisper. Faint. Distant. Daniel's blood ran cold. He turned back toward the sea, toward the empty abyss where the wreck had been. And there, just beneath the surface, he saw it. The Persephone. Not sinking. Not resting. Waiting. Its lights were still on. And in one of the portholes, something watched him. A reflection. His own face. No, not a reflection. It blinked, but he hadn't. Daniel's stomach lurched. His pulse pounded. Then, the voice on the radio spoke again. It was his own voice. "You have to get out. You have to choose the right door." But he was already here. The truth crashed down on him like a tidal wave. They never escaped. They were still inside. The Persephone had never sunk, and neither had they.